Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today we're diving into The Science of Success by Charles Koch. Now, you might know the Koch name from headlines, but this book goes way beyond that. It's a deep dive into his philosophy of market-based management, or MBM, and how he believes it's the driving force behind Koch Industries' success.
What's fascinating here is that Koch doesn't just lay out a set of business principles. He weaves his personal journey and the evolution of his thinking throughout the book. It's part memoir, part manifesto. And it all comes back to this idea that the principles of a free market can be applied to any organization to achieve remarkable
So
results.
it's not just about business, it's about a whole way of thinking.
Exactly. He argues that MBM is about creating value, fostering innovation, and empowering individuals to make decisions that benefit both the organization and society as a whole. He even connects it to broader societal issues, arguing that the principles of MBM can help us address challenges like poverty, environmental degradation, and political dysfunction.
Okay, that's a pretty big claim. But before we get into all that, let's start at the beginning. Koch takes us way back, sharing stories about his family and the origins of Koch Industries. I was particularly struck by his grandfather, Harry Koch, a Dutch immigrant who built a newspaper business in a tiny Texas town.
It's a great example of the entrepreneurial spirit that runs through the whole book. Harry faced incredible challenges, but he found creative ways to overcome them, using barter and building relationships to succeed in a tough environment.
It really sets the stage for the kind of resilience and resourcefulness that Koch Industries is known for. And then there's his father, Fred Koch, a brilliant chemical engineer who built oil refineries in the Soviet Union during Stalin's reign. Talk about a trial by fire.
That experience had a profound impact on Fred, shaping his worldview and his staunch anti-communist stance. He witnessed firsthand the dangers of centralized control and the suppression of individual liberty. It's no surprise that these themes became central to his son's business philosophy.
And Fred had his own battles back in the U.S., fighting with the patent club for years. His advice to Charles about those lawsuits, never sue, speaks volumes about his pragmatism and his aversion to unnecessary conflict.
He saw the toll that litigation could take, even when you were in the right, and instilled in Charles a deep respect for the rule of law and the importance of finding mutually beneficial solutions. These early lessons clearly shaped Charles's approach to business and to life.
So we've got this backdrop, family history, hard work, and a deep belief in individual initiative. And then comes Charles, who, despite his MIT education, wasn't initially thrilled about joining the family business.
It's interesting, isn't it? You'd think someone with his pedigree would be eager to step into a leadership role. But Charles had his own ambitions. It took his father essentially threatening to sell the company to bring him back into the fold.
And thank goodness he did. His first big challenge, cleaning up a mess for Koch Engineering in Europe, really showed his leadership potential. From there, it's a whirlwind of growth, with acquisitions and refining, chemicals, fibers, polymers, you name it, they probably have a hand in it.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Koch is very candid about the failures and setbacks they faced along the way. He sees those experiences as crucial learning opportunities, arguing that progress comes through experimentation and failure. It's this willingness to take risks, learn from mistakes, and constantly adapt that he believes sets Koch Industries apart.
This is where his study of history, economics, and philosophy comes in. He was deeply influenced by thinkers like Friedrich Hayek and Ludwig von Mises, who championed the power of free markets and individual liberty.
Right, and this is where the seeds of MBM are planted. Koch started to see how the principles of a free market, things like voluntary exchange, competition, and the price system could be applied within an organization to create a more dynamic and innovative culture.
So, it's not just about making money. It's about creating a system where everyone has the opportunity to contribute, innovate, and benefit from their efforts. It's almost like creating a mini-society within the company itself.
That's a great way to put it. He talks about how traditional hierarchical structures can stifle creativity and discourage people from taking ownership. He wanted to create a system where people were empowered to make decisions, take risks, and be rewarded for their contributions.
He wasn't just theorizing either. Koch started incorporating these economic concepts into Koch Industries early on. He talks about using principles like opportunity cost and comparative advantage to make better decisions about resource allocation and talent management.
One anecdote that really stuck with me was the story about selling inventory below cost. It seemed counterintuitive. But Koch explains that by considering the opportunity cost of holding on to that inventory, the potential profits they could be making elsewhere, it made perfect sense to sell it, even at a loss.
That's a great example of how he was thinking differently. applying these economic principles to real-world situations. And this eventually evolved into a formal system with a dedicated development group in the MBM toolkit, designed to help people throughout the company understand and apply these principles.
This emphasis on knowledge and practical application is key to MBM. It's not just about abstract theories. It's about giving people the tools and the understanding they need to make better decisions in their day-to-day work.
But Koch Industries didn't operate in a vacuum, right? As they grew, they faced increasing regulation, scrutiny, and yes, those infamous lawsuits. It's interesting how Koch frames these challenges in the context of what he calls political means versus economic means of gaining wealth.
Yeah, it's a crucial distinction. He argues that economic means involves creating value through voluntary exchange, while political means relies on using force or coercion to extract wealth from others. He sees this as a fundamental ethical issue, and it's why he places so much emphasis on ethical conduct and building a strong reputation for integrity.
So, it's not just about making money, it's about making money the right way. And this led to the development of a robust public sector capability within Koch Industries, right?
Absolutely. It's about engaging with policymakers, building relationships, and advocating for policies that promote free markets and individual liberty. He sees this as a necessary part of creating a more prosperous and just society.
Okay. So we've got this foundation of family history, philosophical influences, and a deep commitment to ethical conduct. This brings us to the heart of the book,
Yeah.
the 5 dimensions of MBM.
Each dimension is intertwined with the others, and they all work together to create this system of what Koch calls principled entrepreneurship. We're talking about vision, virtue and talents, knowledge processes, decision rights, and incentives. Ready to dive in?
I'm all ears. Let's start with vision. How does Koch Industries define its vision? And how does that tie into the whole MBM philosophy?
Well, the book really hammers home the idea that a company's vision should be about creating long-term value for society. It's not just about maximizing profits in the short term, it's about making a lasting positive impact. And they believe that the best way to do that is by focusing on what they call customer-driven innovation.
So it's about understanding what customers truly value and finding ways to deliver those benefits in new and innovative ways.
Exactly. They believe that competition naturally erodes profitability over time. So you have to be constantly innovating and anticipating future customers' needs to stay ahead of the curve. It's what economists call creative destruction, and they offer some really fascinating examples of how they've put this principle into practice.
Like what? Can you give us a specific example?
One that comes to mind is the evolution of Stainmaster Carpet by Invista Interiors. They didn't just come up with a stain-resistant carpet and call it a day. They constantly innovated, adding features like softness, wear resistance, and even enhanced visual appeal, all based on what they learned about their customers' evolving needs and desires.
So it's not just about coming up with a great product. It's about constantly iterating and improving to stay ahead of the competition and deliver even more value to customers.
Precisely. And they also stress the importance of knowing when to let go. They have a very disciplined approach to selling assets or businesses, even profitable ones, if they no longer align with their core capabilities or their long-term vision.
That takes guts to walk away from something that's working.
Yeah.
But it makes sense in the context of this long-term value creation mindset. So what are those core capabilities? How do they decide what to keep and what to let go?
They've identified 6 core capabilities that guide their decision-making. MBM itself, innovation, operations excellence, trading, transaction excellence, and public sector. Each of these plays a critical role in their ability to create value and achieve their long-term goals.
And we see all of these in action with their acquisition of Georgia-Pacific back in 2005, right? That was a massive undertaking.
Yeah.
Moving into the forest products industry.
Absolutely. It was a bold move. But they saw the potential to apply their core capabilities and create significant value in a new market. It wasn't just about getting bigger. It was about finding new opportunities to leverage their strengths and create lasting positive impact.
All right, so we've got this clear vision focused on long-term value creation. But a vision's only as good as the people who execute, right? Which brings us to the second dimension of MBM, virtue and talents. This seems especially relevant given some of the controversies surrounding Koch Industries.
You're right. They've been in the spotlight for their political activities and their stance on issues like climate change. But in the book, Koch really emphasizes the importance of ethical conduct and building a culture based on shared values and principles.
So not just about being smart and talented, it's about being good. That's a refreshing message in today's business world.
It is. He lays out Koch Industries' guiding principles, which focus on integrity, compliance, customer focus, and of course, value creation. He argues that these principles aren't just words on a page, they're the foundation of their culture and guide their decision-making at every level.
They even have this unique performance evaluation system, the ABC system, which is designed to assess both talent and virtue. Tell me more about that. How does it work?
It's fascinating. Instead of focusing solely on traditional performance metrics, the ABC system evaluates employees based on their contribution to value creation, their adherence to the company's guiding principles, and their potential for future growth. They categorize employees as A, B, or C, with A players being the top performers who consistently create value and embody the company's values.
So it's not just about hitting your numbers. It's about how you achieve those results and whether your actions are aligned with the company's overall mission.
Exactly. And they use the system to provide targeted feedback, development opportunities, and to ensure that people are in roles where their talents and values can truly shine. They even draw inspiration from Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, recognizing that different people excel in different areas.
It's about finding the best fit for each individual, not just trying to force everyone into the same mold.
Right. They believe that embracing this diversity of talents and perspectives is essential for driving innovation and achieving long-term success.
So it's not just about celebrating differences, right? There's also a strong emphasis on shared values and ethical conduct. How do they ensure that everyone is on the same page when it comes to doing business the right way?
They start by being very intentional about their hiring process. They look for people who not only have the skills and experience they need, but who also demonstrate a strong alignment with the company's values and principles.
So it's not just about checking boxes on a resume. It's about finding people who are the right fit for the culture they're trying to create.
Exactly. And once people are on board, they have ongoing training programs, mentoring opportunities, and clear expectations about how they're expected to conduct themselves. They even have mechanisms for reporting ethical concerns without fear of reprisal.
It sounds like they're really trying to walk the walk when it comes to ethical conduct, not just talk the talk.
That's definitely the goal. They recognize that their reputation is one of their most valuable assets, and they've invested a lot of time and resources into building a culture of integrity.
Okay. So we've got a clear vision, a strong emphasis on virtue and talents, and this unique approach to performance evaluation. This brings us to the third dimension of MBM knowledge processes. What exactly are we talking about here?
This is where it gets really interesting. Koch believes that knowledge is the key to success. But not just any knowledge. He's talking about practical, actionable knowledge that can be used to create value and solve problems.
So it's not just about having a lot of information. It's about knowing what to do with that information.
Exactly. And he argues that free market economies are incredibly good at generating useful knowledge. He talks about how market signals things like prices, profits, and losses provide valuable information about what people value and what's working.
So in a free market, you don't need a central planner to tell you what to produce or how to run your business.
Yeah.
The market itself provides the feedback you need to make good decisions.
Right. And Koch believes that you can apply the same principle within an organization. He talks about using tools like profit and loss statements, internal markets, and benchmarking to gather information and guide decision-making.
So instead of relying on gut feeling or top-down directives, they're using data and feedback to make more informed decisions.
Exactly. One of the key concepts here is the idea of a profit center. They organize their businesses into these mini businesses, each with its own profit and loss statement. This creates internal market signals that can be used to evaluate performance, allocate resources, and encourage entrepreneurship.
It's like simulating a free market within the company itself.
That's a great way to put it. And it allows them to decentralize decision-making and empower people at all levels to take ownership and find creative solutions.
I'm starting to see how all of these dimensions fit together. It's about creating a system where people are empowered to make decisions, take risks, and be rewarded for their contributions, all while adhering to a strong ethical framework.
Exactly. And this emphasis on knowledge and feedback loops is crucial for ensuring that the system is constantly adapting and improving.
Okay, so we've covered vision, virtue, and talents, and knowledge processes. This brings us to the fourth dimension of MBM decision rights. How does Koch Industries approach this one?
This is where their deep belief in individual liberty and responsibility really comes into play. They argue that clear, dependable property rights are essential for both a market economy and a successful organization.
So just like you need to have clear ownership of your property in a free market, you need to have clear ownership of responsibilities and decision-making authority within a company.
Right. They believe that when property rights are unclear, You get something called the tragedy of the commons.
Oh, yeah. I remember that from my economics classes. It's where everyone acts in their own self-interest and ends up depleting a shared resource because no one feels individually responsible for its preservation.
Exactly. And they argue that this applies just as much within a company as it does in society at large.
Yeah.
If no one feels ownership of a particular problem or opportunity, it's likely to get neglected or mishandled.
So how do they address this? How do they assign decision rights within the company?
They have a very deliberate process they call roles, responsibilities,
Right.
and expectations, or RRNEs. Each employee has clearly defined RRNEs that outline their responsibilities and the decision-making authority they have.
So everyone knows what they're responsible for and what decisions they're empowered to make. No more passing the buck or waiting for someone else to take charge.
Right. And they stress the importance of aligning those decision rights with an employee's demonstrated capabilities and comparative advantages. They believe that decisions should be made by the people who have the best knowledge and skills to make them, regardless of their position in the hierarchy.
So it's not about who has the fanciest title. It's about who can create the most value.
Exactly. And they even have a concept called principled entrepreneurship, where employees are encouraged to take initiative and find solutions even if they don't have direct authority over all the resources.
They're empowering people to be proactive and find ways to create value, even if it means stepping outside their defined roles. That's pretty cool. But it also seems like it could create chaos if not managed carefully.
It definitely requires a high level of trust and accountability. But they believe that the potential benefits increased innovation, engagement, and ownership far outweigh the risks.
I'm starting to see how all of these dimensions fit together. They're creating a system where people are empowered to make decisions, take risks, and be rewarded for their contributions, all while adhering to a strong ethical framework and a relentless focus on knowledge and learning.
You're getting it. And it all comes down to creating the right incentives to align individual behavior with the company's goals and values.
Which brings us to their final dimension, right? Incentives. How does Koch Industries use incentives to motivate their employees and drive the kind of behavior they're looking for?
This is where they really challenge conventional thinking about compensation and motivation. They argue that incentives should be designed to align the interests of the employee with the interests of the company and society as a whole.
So it's not just about maximizing individual gain. It's about creating a win-win situation for everyone involved.
Exactly. And they believe that the best way to do this is by tying compensation to value creation. They criticize traditional pay systems that focus on titles, seniority, or experience, arguing that they discourage innovation and entrepreneurship.
So it's not about how long you've been with the company or what your job title is. It's about the value you bring to the table.
Right. They want to create a system where people are rewarded for their contributions, not for simply showing up or climbing the corporate ladder.
Okay, but how do they actually do that? What are the practical mechanisms they use to tie compensation to value creation?
That's where it gets really interesting. They use a variety of approaches, including profit sharing, game sharing, and other incentive programs that are designed to reward people for achieving specific goals that contribute to the company's overall success.
So it's not just about getting a bigger paycheck. It's about having a stake in the company's success and being rewarded for making a real difference.
Exactly. And they believe that this approach attracts and retains the right kind of people, those who are motivated by challenge, innovation, and the opportunity to make a real impact. They want people who are excited to come to work every day and find new ways to create value.
That's a pretty inspiring vision. But I imagine it's not always easy to implement, especially in a large, complex organization like Koch Industries.
You're right. It requires a lot of careful planning,
Yeah.
communication, and a willingness to constantly adapt and improve. But they believe it's the key to unlocking sustainable success.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the 5 dimensions of MBM and how they all work together to create this system of principled entrepreneurship. What are some of the key takeaways for our listeners? What can they learn from Koch's approach, even if they're not running a multi-billion-dollar company?
That's a great question. I think there are several important lessons that can be applied to any context, whether you're leading a team, starting a business, or just trying to achieve your own personal goals.
I'm all ears. What are some of the key takeaways that our listeners should be thinking about?
Well, one of the biggest takeaways for me is the importance of aligning your actions with your values. Koch talks a lot about the importance of integrity and ethical conduct, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's essential for building trust and creating long-term value.
That really resonated with me too. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day pressures of work and lose sight of the bigger picture. But Koch makes a compelling case that ethical conduct is not just a moral imperative, it's a strategic advantage.
Exactly. And it's not just about avoiding illegal or unethical behavior. It's about actively seeking out opportunities to create value for others and make a positive impact on the world. He talks about how this mindset has guided Koch Industries' investments in education, criminal justice reform, and even environmental sustainability.
Which is interesting, given that they've been criticized for their environmental record in the past.
It's true. They had a complex history when it comes to environmental issues. But Koch argues that MBM has helped them to become more environmentally responsible by aligning their business practices with the long-term interests of society. He sees environmental stewardship as a key part of creating a sustainable and prosperous future.
So it's not just about complying with regulations, it's about going above and beyond to find ways to minimize their environmental impact and contribute to a healthier planet.
Right. And he believes that this approach is not only ethically sound, but it's also good for business. Consumers are increasingly demanding that companies operate in a sustainable and ethical manner. And investors are starting to factor environmental and governance, ESG, factors into their investment decisions.
So it's not just about doing the right thing, it's also about doing the smart thing for the long-term health of the business.
Exactly. And this brings us to another key takeaway from the book: the importance of embracing change and continuous improvement. Koch is a big believer in experimentation and learning from mistakes. He even has a saying, fail fast, learn fast, which encourages people to take risks and not be afraid to make mistakes.
That's a powerful message, especially in a culture that often punishes failure. It reminds me of something else Koch said in the book. Progress comes through experimentation and failure. It's this willingness to embrace uncertainty and learn from their mistakes that has allowed them to innovate and adapt to changing market conditions.
It's so true, and it ties into the whole concept of creative destruction that we talked about earlier. You have to be willing to let go of old ideas and embrace new ones if you want to stay ahead of the curve.
It's about constantly challenging the status quo and looking for ways to do things better, faster, and more efficiently. But that kind of change can be scary for people, right? How do you create a culture where people are comfortable taking risks and experimenting without fear of reprisal?
That's a great question. And Koch acknowledges that it's not easy. It requires strong leadership, a culture of trust and transparency, and a clear commitment to learning and development. He talks about how they've created systems and processes to encourage feedback, recognize and reward innovation, and provide support for people who are trying new things.
It sounds like they're really trying to create a culture where it's safe to fail, as long as you learn from those failures and apply those lessons to future endeavors.
Exactly. And they've even implemented processes like challenge meetings, where employees are encouraged to question assumptions and propose new ideas, even if those ideas challenge conventional wisdom or the opinions of more senior leaders.
That's pretty radical. It takes a lot of confidence and humility to create a system where you're actively encouraging people to challenge your own ideas.
It does. But Koch believes that this kind of intellectual honesty and open debate is essential for driving innovation and making better decisions. He wants to create a culture where the best ideas win, regardless of where they come from.
It's about creating a meritocracy of ideas, where everyone has a voice and the best solutions rise to the top. That's a powerful concept. But I imagine it's not always easy to implement in practice.
You're right. It requires a lot of discipline and a willingness to let go of ego. But when it works, it can be incredibly powerful.
So we've talked about aligning your actions with your values, embracing change and continuous improvement, and creating a culture where people feel empowered to challenge the status quo and contribute their best ideas. What else? What are some other key takeaways from the book that our listeners should be thinking about?
Well, one thing that really struck me is the importance of focusing on the long term. Koch is a big believer in thinking generations ahead and making decisions that will create lasting value, not just short-term gains.
That's a refreshing perspective in a world that often seems obsessed with quarterly earnings and instant gratification. But it makes sense, especially when you consider the scale and scope of Koch Industries. They're not just thinking about the next quarter, they're thinking about the next century.
Exactly. And it's not just about financial returns, it's about building a legacy of positive impact on the world. He talks about how they're investing in education and research to address some of the biggest challenges facing humanity, from poverty to climate change.
It's about using their resources and influence to make a real difference in the world. It's a pretty inspiring vision.
It is, and it ties into another key theme from the book: the importance of individual responsibility. Koch believes that everyone has the potential to make a positive impact on the world, and he encourages people to take ownership of their lives and their communities.
It's about empowering people to be agents of change, not just passive bystanders.
Right. He talks about how even small acts of kindness or initiative can have a ripple effect and inspire others to do the same.
That's a powerful message. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of the problems facing the world. But Koch reminds us that each of us has the power to make a difference.
And he doesn't shy away from the tough questions either. He tackles complex issues like income inequality, climate change, and the role of government, offering his perspective on how we can create a more just and prosperous society.
He's not afraid to share his opinions, even when they're controversial. He encourages readers to engage with these ideas and come to their own conclusions.
That's one of the things I appreciate most about the book. It's not just a prescription for business success. It's an invitation to think critically about some of the biggest challenges facing our world and to find ways to make a positive difference.
It's a call to action, not just a theoretical treatise. He's challenging us to step up and be part of the solution.
Exactly. He believes that the principles of MBM individual initiative, ethical conduct, value creation, continuous improvement can be applied to any context to achieve remarkable results.
I love that. It's not just about business. It's about life.
It is, and while MBM might not be a perfect system, and Koch Industries has certainly faced its share of criticism, there's no denying that they've achieved incredible success while staying true to their values.
I think there's a lot we can all learn from their journey, even if we don't agree with everything they do.
I completely agree, and one of the most important lessons, for me at least, is the importance of being humble and always striving to learn and grow. Koch talks about how he's constantly reading, studying, and seeking out new knowledge, even at 80 years old.
That's inspiring. It's a reminder that we're never too old or too successful to stop learning and growing.
Exactly. And it ties into the whole MBM philosophy of continuous improvement. It's not about achieving perfection. It's about constantly seeking out ways to do things faster and more efficiently.
It's about embracing a growth mindset and never settling for the status quo.
Right. And that's something we can all apply to our own lives, regardless of our career path or personal goal.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of aligning your actions with your values, embracing change and continuous improvement, focusing on the long term, taking individual responsibility, and always striving to learn and grow. What else? What are some of the potential pitfalls that Koch highlights in the book? Are there any things that people should be aware of if they're thinking about implementing some of these principles in their own lives or organizations?
That's a great question. And Koch is very candid about the fact that MBM is not a magic bullet. It's a complex system that requires careful planning, implementation, and ongoing adaptation.
So it's not something you can just download and install like a software program. It requires a deep understanding of the principles and a willingness to put in the work to make it work.
Exactly. And one of the biggest challenges he highlights is the danger of applying MBM too rigidly, turning it into a bureaucratic checklist instead of a dynamic philosophy.
So focusing on the form over the substance, kind of like those charts for Charles examples you mentioned earlier, where people were just going through the motions without really understanding the underlying principles.
Exactly. And he warns against turning MBM into a set of meaningless buzzwords or using it to justify decisions that have already been made.
So using MBM as a shield instead of a guide, that seems like a common problem with any management philosophy, right? It's easy to twist things to fit your own agenda or to use it as a way to avoid accountability.
It is. And Koch stresses that for MBM to truly work, you need leaders who understand the system deeply and can spot and correct these misapplications early on.
So it's not something you can just delegate to a team of consultants or roll out with a PowerPoint presentation and expect everyone to magically get it. It requires ongoing education.
Coaching.
And a commitment to continuous improvement from everyone involved, especially the leadership team.
Absolutely. And he acknowledges that even with the best efforts, mistakes will be made. The key is to create a culture where those mistakes are seen as learning opportunities, not failures to be punished.
Because as we discussed earlier, experimentation and failure are essential parts of the innovation process. You can't have breakthroughs without taking risks and learning from your mistakes.
Precisely. And that brings us back to this idea of creating a system of spontaneous order, where individuals are empowered to take risks, challenge the status quo, and find new and better ways of doing things.
Which sounds great in theory, but I imagine it can be quite challenging to actually create that kind of culture in practice. It takes a lot of trust, open communication, and a willingness to embrace uncertainty.
It definitely can be. It requires a high level of trust, open communication, and a willingness to embrace change. But according to Koch, the potential rewards are well worth the effort. When you create a culture where people feel safe to experiment, take risks, and share their ideas, you unleash a tremendous amount of creativity and innovation.
So,
Mhm.
it's not just about implementing a set of rules or procedures. It's about creating an environment where people feel empowered to contribute their best selves and make a real difference.
Exactly. And that's what makes MBM so compelling. It's not just a business philosophy, it's a philosophy for life.
Okay, so we've explored some of the key takeaways from the science of success and discussed some of the potential pitfalls to be aware of. But what about the successes? Are there any real-world examples of how these principles have been applied to achieve tangible results? I mean, we've talked a lot about Koch Industries, but what about other organizations or individuals? Has anyone else been able to successfully implement these ideas?
That's a great question. And Koch provides a number of examples in the book, both from within Koch Industries and from other organizations that have adopted some of the principles of MBM.
I'm all ears. What are some of the examples that really stood out to you?
Well, one that comes to mind is the story of the Matador Cattle Company. It's a fascinating case study in how MBM principles can be applied to transform even a traditional industry like ranching.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What happened there?
So Matador was facing a lot of the same challenges that many ranches do: unpredictable weather, volatile markets, and a complex web of regulations. They were doing okay, but they knew they could do better.
Sounds familiar. It's like every business these days is facing some version of that.
Right. So they decided to implement some of the principles of MBM. They started by focusing on what they could control. They developed clear metrics to track their performance, identified their core capabilities, and implemented a system of decision rights and incentives to align the interests of their employees with the goals of the company.
So they basically created a mini market economy within their ranch.
Exactly. And the results were pretty remarkable. They saw significant improvements in profitability, productivity, and employee morale. The ranchers were more engaged and took more ownership of the work because they knew they were being rewarded for their contributions.
That's a great example of how these principles can be applied in a very different context. It's not just about big corporations. It's about finding ways to create value and empower people in any organization.
And it's not just about businesses either. Koch talks about how MBM principles can be applied to nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and even personal goals.
So it's really about creating a system of principled entrepreneurship wherever you are and whatever you're doing.
Precisely. He believes that these principles can help us to address some of the biggest challenges facing humanity, from poverty to climate change.
That's a pretty bold statement, but I can see how this kind of mindset could lead to some pretty innovative solutions.
He even challenges readers to think about how they can apply these principles to their own lives. How can you be more entrepreneurial in your own work? How can you create more value for others? How can you use knowledge and feedback to make better decisions?
It's a call to action, to think differently about success, and to find ways to make a positive impact on the world.
And I think that's what makes this book so compelling. It's not just a dry business book. It's a book about ideas, about principles, about how we can create a better future for ourselves and for generations to come.
Definitely giving me a lot to think about. I'm curious, what are some of the passages from the book that really resonated with you?
Well, one that sticks with me is this quote: "The true measure of success is not how much money you make, but how much value you create for others."
That's a powerful statement. It really gets to the heart of what MBM is all about. It's not just about maximizing profit. It's about making a positive impact on the world.
Exactly. And another quote that stood out to me was this: "The best way to predict the future is to create it."
I love that.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we're not just passive observers of our own destiny. We have the power to shape our own future and the future of the world around us.
And that's what MBM is all about. It's about empowering individuals to take ownership, to be innovative, to create value, and to make a difference.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. From the history of Koch Industries to the 5 dimensions of MBM and everything in between.
It's been a fascinating journey, and I think our listeners have a lot to ponder.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the science of success, what are some final thoughts for our listeners? What should they take away from this conversation?
I think the biggest takeaway is that MBM is more than just a set of business principles. It's a philosophy, a way of thinking about the world that can be applied to any aspect of our lives.
It's about being intentional, about creating value, about seeking out knowledge and feedback, and about empowering ourselves and others to make a positive impact.
And while it might not be easy, it's certainly worth striving for.
Well said. So if you're looking for a new way to think about success, whether in your work, your personal life, or your community, I highly recommend checking out The Science of Success by Charles Koch. It's a challenging, thought-provoking read that might just change the way you see the world.
And remember, success is not just about achieving your own goals. It's about making a positive contribution to the world around you.
So go out there, create value, be principled entrepreneurs, and make a difference.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving for success.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you on the next episode of Books and Bytes.